To this Reflections on the EFF 11 debate. My name is Stephen Anderson, and I'm the Content Relationship Evangelist for Promethean. I want to welcome everybody wherever you're dialing in from the world. So I'm in the United States. I'm in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, but I can see from the participant list we have folks dialing in from all over the world, which is what is the great thing about doing these events is that you get multiple perspectives, and for someone like me, here in the U.S., it's so great to participate in events like EFF and the EFF follow-ups to hear that global perspective. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. Make sure you select the appropriate audio option for you. You can either have WebEx dial you back, which is no cost to you. You can enter in your phone number, and WebEx will dial you through the telephone, which is usually the most effective way to be able to listen to our broadcast. Or you can join through the speakers and mic on your computer, but we do recommend that you use a headset because if you don't, it can cause feedback later on when we open this up for questions. So make sure you choose the most appropriate audio option for you. And if you have a problem, you can drop those questions into the chat. You can see there. Make sure you send those in. And don't forget to, we want to hear your thoughts. We want to hear what you have to say, so make sure you send in questions or comments, and make sure you change the drop down there from send to all participants. That way everybody can see what you have to say. We're also encouraging you to use the Q&A feature to ask questions as we go through, and we'll be collecting those, and we'll ask those as we go through. And then we want you to be able to share where you're from. What is it that you do in terms of education, or what is your position in your school or your authority? So you can go ahead and add those into the chat feature there as well. So as we get started, I want to welcome everybody, including our presenters. So we have two of some leading minds in terms of mobile learning with us today, and they were both on with us at EFF 11. Gavin Dykes, he's the co-founder and director of EFF. He's also an independent education consultant, a technology advisor. He's working with governments, agencies, and major corporations and institutions across the world on policy and strategy. So we want to welcome Gavin. And we also want to welcome Adrian Godfrey, who's a member of GSMA, and he's head of their education team, which is a part of their Connected Living program. So we want to welcome you both to the EFF 11 follow-up. So as we get started, we have a poll question that we want to ask you, and we're going to ask this question at the beginning, and we're going to ask this question at the end. But we want to hear what your thoughts are on the importance of mobile learning for students. So it's a scale. So the scale is 1. Mobile learning is not important at all. So if you think mobile learning is not important at all to a student's education, you would do a 1. If you think mobile learning is a cornerstone for an effective education, you're going to do a 5, and then you can kind of rank anywhere in between there depending on what your thoughts and your feelings are there. So we'll leave that open. There's the poll. So you can, how important do you see learning for the future of education? So 1 being not important at all, or 5 being a cornerstone, or something in between. And we'll give you just a few seconds, up to a minute to answer that question.
Stephen, this is Jim. I'm just coming on audio because one of our attendees has said there's a bad echo on the line. So I've just sent out a chat asking if people have joined by audio to please go on mute. But I also come online just to remind people that there is a chat function which we're monitoring. And if you'd like to put a question or a point to anybody, then please use the chat function. But importantly, if you are joining by audio, please go on mute to stop any background noise and echo. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. So just a few more seconds to answer that question. Okay, now the poll has ended, so let's see if we can see the results there. So I'm not sure if we'll be able to see the results, but someone will feed me the results to that as we get going, and we'll be able to look at that later on. I don't want to take any more time away from our two esteemed guests. Oh, there's the results. So good. So nobody said that it wasn't important at all. So that's great. So we have 43% and 36% saying that it's either a cornerstone to an effective education or just right there at that. So that's well in line with my feelings as a former director of technology. I wholeheartedly agree. So let's hear from our esteemed guests. So the first question that I want to ask you all is, so EFF, I had the pleasure of being a part of EFF 11, and it was a very, very spirited debate. There were many aspects that we talked about during the debate. And so what I'd like to hear from each of you is what was the biggest takeaway for you from that event? And let's start with Adrian. Oh, Adrian, you might be on mute. You might have to come off mute there.
How's that, Stephen?
Oh, there you go. Very good.
There you go. Some education required, clearly. I had a few takeaways. Specifically, what stuck in my head was the comment around investments in e-learning generally showing little return. That was a good shock comment at the beginning and not entirely unexpected. There was a wonderful quote from one of our first speakers about it's not tech but culture. And I've always believed that behavioral change around knowledge is absolutely critical for showing a transformation in education. A lack of real examples came up, and I made a big note about that. And you're absolutely right. I don't think people are shouting loud enough about what's actually happened, or perhaps there aren't the real examples yet at scale that we need to see, or perhaps the measurements just aren't in place and people aren't actually measuring the impact. But overall, there was a support for my belief that this is a complex area and really lacks a leader, a clear leader.
Gavin, what do you think? What were your biggest takeaways? You might be on mute there as well.
Stephen, I think they're taking me too seriously to go on mute. But Joanne, you can unmute people, you know, as host. There you go. Gavin is now available.
All right. Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Very well, yes.
Yeah. So I would take two main things away. One is about quantity and the other is about quality. So looking at the numbers, there are about 6.9 billion mobile contracts in the world today. So some of the numbers suggest MobiForge, for example, and that's about 6.9 billion SIMs. So that's almost one for every person in the world. Now, even if 50% of people don't have one of these SIMs, because we have a number of people who have more than one, then we already are reaching half the world with mobile technology. That's extraordinary. Some other figures come in there. Ericsson's figures suggest that it's closer to 4.5 billion, so well over than 50%. I think that represents an extraordinary opportunity for reaching a significant proportion of the world and supporting learning in a variety of different ways. I think also there's something in those figures which is important, which is the access is different from that which we might traditionally expect. So if you look at the fixed line access in developed nations, fixed line access is about 40%, and mobile phone access in the developing world looks to be around 90%. So there are some very interesting things going on which actually might cause us to recast what we think about the distribution and the opportunities that revolve around different countries. So that's the quantity one. The quality one was really a reflection that, and this is in line, I think, with what Adrian said. Too often we get stuck thinking about education as it is rather than what it could or should be. So we then apply technology to things as they are, which is almost always a little disappointing, and maybe is the reason we come up with the comments about the investment in education, in technology in education that Adrian mentioned. But if we use technology to do things differently, then the world becomes a much more exciting world, a much more exciting place. And I can give examples of where that's happened, but maybe they'll come out in the conversation that follows.
Yeah, I mean, I think the quality was a big takeaway for me, and so I think that statement there that we get stuck on thinking about ed as it is rather than what it could be, I think is dead on when we start talking about technology. And I was just sitting here thinking in my mind, you know, a lot of schools and districts, especially where I am, are purchasing technology to solve a problem rather than think about what that potential for technology is down the road. And so I think the same thing is true for mobile learning. So I think that's dead on. So moving forward, so I was, as a director of technology, I was heavily invested in a bring your own device program where students could bring their own mobile technologies from home. Those types of programs, along with one-to-one programs, are gaining a lot of momentum, especially here in the U.S. But what was really truly amazing to me as part of EFF was there is a major shift in other parts of the world to almost abandon a one-to-one or a one laptop per student initiative and moving into a one laptop per teacher initiative. So is that a move in the right direction? Is that something that we should be thinking about for education globally, or is that aimed to solve a problem more at the local level? Let's start with Gavin.
I'd say that's misinterpretation of what was said, because clearly no device at all isn't going to help with empowerment. However, if you're in a country where you can afford one device in a class, is it better that that's in the hands of the student or a student, or is it better in the hands of a teacher? And remember that it can be passed from hand to hand, whatever. So I think that was the tone of that argument, that it wasn't about taking away from the one-to-one projects, but more about actually when you have limited resource, how do you deal with it? And then I think there was a follow-on part of that discussion, which was associated with the benefits of learning by collaboration, by working together and learning and sharing from your peers, as it were. And a lot of Miguel Nussbaum's research, as I recall, is around that sharing. And one of the great tools for working in sharing information and working together and collaborating to learn, I think, is the tablet technologies, because you can lay the tablet flat, you can have multiple people looking at that technology together, sharing and perhaps even debating and arguing with each other over things, and that is a great way to learn. So if you get 5 people around a single tablet, then that should be used. And that all points to me to be thinking carefully about the pedagogies that we use in teaching and learning. It's not all about one-to-one. Sometimes it is right that one person has the technology and is using it to show other people things. Sometimes it's right that it's maybe between 5 and people are sharing. And sometimes it's great if everybody has a piece of technology and is doing work more individually or connectedly through working with others through the technology.
Adrian, what do you think?
I absolutely agree with Gavin. What I heard on the debate was a huge support generally for empowering teachers. So whether it's professional development to be able to use and deliver teaching in a different way through the technology, or actually giving physical devices, I think there's still a lot of support for empowering teachers. I heard that question or that statement in the context of developing in emerging countries, and I have to agree that the drive towards building the capacity of teachers, including giving them devices, has got to show more fruit yield more fruit in the short term than trying to get laptops in every child's hand. So I think within that context it's right. In the broader context, I think mobile is phenomenal for supplemental learning in both formal and informal settings. So I think appropriate use should also be a focus. And appropriate comes down to context, availability of devices, cost, and the ability to use them effectively in the teaching and learning process. So I guess those are the points that really came out of that discussion for me.
It's definitely an issue about empowerment, and I don't think it's empowering one group over the other. It's empowerment for all. And I think what Gavin mentioned about just having access to a device and being able to use it multiple different ways, I think is what's really important. And I want to hit on something else that Gavin mentioned here in just a second, but I want to remind everybody to don't forget, we want to hear from you. We want to hear what you have to say. So please use the Q&A feature. Drop those questions into the chat, and we'll make sure that that we can get those in. So Gavin mentioned about pedagogy, which for me, as someone who was overseeing a Bring Your Own Device initiative, I focused more, and I had my teachers who were in my pilot program. We focused very heavily on pedagogy because we learned early on when we just put devices into a classroom and we provided technology training to the teacher, their ability to teach suffered because they were more worried about all of the things that they needed or could do with the device rather than worried about their content and the way that they were teaching. So we spent a lot of time talking about pedagogy. And so Gavin really mentioned that pedagogy was really important. So how does that teaching need to change? What is it that teachers and educators need to keep in mind when they're looking at using mobile technologies in their classroom with students? Let's start with Adrian.
I think without being too prescriptive, your point about pedagogy is absolutely critical. I read a report recently, and I'll try and remember the reference, about more mature and experienced teachers actually being able to implement technology in their teaching and learning more effectively than junior teachers. And the junior teachers may have grown up with technology, but they lacked all the other aspects of a great teacher. They struggled to control their classes. They struggled with the amount of curriculum they had to get through, and they couldn't see a new way of incorporating some of the teaching and some of the technology into the teaching and learning, whereas the older teachers, more experienced teachers, could. So I think it's probably an overused phrase, but for me, the coach as an overview is absolutely critical. And for me, it's about making or helping the learners make good learning choices. So guiding them through the process of making sure their references are substantial or substantiated, making sure they understand the most effective ways of using the technology, and doing that by making learning much more authentic. We've spoken about collaborative learning. For me, the social aspect of learning is absolutely critical to make things project-based, much more authentic, and of course cross-curricular. None of that is easy. We're not pretending that's easy, and does necessitate, I think, a relook at curriculum and a relook at content, as well as teacher training and professional development.
Gavin, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think, I mean, there's a first thing I would say, I'm not looking at putting mobile technology into learning. I'm thinking about it the other way around. I know in most circumstances, I think we probably know what we want people to learn. And what we then need to think about is what's the best way of doing it. And then if we're using, if we have technology available to us, we make decisions about how best to use that technology. And it makes me think of, some of you may be familiar with Conrad Wolfram's work. I'm thinking about math in a different way. But Conrad, I think, talks about maths in 4 sections. So you talk about, first, the ability to ask good questions. So what are the things we're wanting to solve that maths might be able to help us with? Then we're translating it into a mathematical form, so that we can cause those solutions. The third step is computation, and the fourth is retranslation back into a form that can be used by people. So that we spend in math in school most of our time looking at computation or working our ways through computational methods of one kind or another. Very little of the time do we spend looking at the questions that we need to ask, developing our questioning so that we think of good things to investigate. Also, Conrad would say that computation is one thing that technology does really well. So why we're spending our efforts on really honing those skills of computation, when actually I think really good maths could begin with more emphasis on the questions we ask, moving into translating those questions into a form that maths can resolve, and that might include programming of different kinds, and finally transferring that information, the kind of almost data journalism that we see, presenting information in different ways that is really compelling and interesting but usable by a wider group of people. So we can think of subjects in quite different ways. And there are other examples I was thinking about. Apps for Good is one, which many people may know, but that is about the development, firstly, the identification of a problem within a community or within a school, a family or whatever. But the children do that, the students do that, and they find, they identify a problem, then they work up what might be a resolution to that. They then work with other people to develop the app that might resolve it. And ultimately, you actually get something that is usable, relates to the real world, and I think is generally much more interesting. I think also, one other thing, I put a shout out here for the Quadley Institute Student Aspirations, because I think the direction of travel there, where we're much more engaged with student aspirations where they want to go, we need to be engaging that questioning more in the kind of education that's involved with the work that the Quadley Institute is doing. And I think, so there is a move and a movement in those directions. Now, all of those play into a different way of looking at education and learning, and play into a different way in which we can engage the use of technology to provide exciting solutions to it.
So keeping with that content theme, so one thing that you mentioned in the beginning, Gavin, was that there's in developing countries there are mobile networks. 90% of these developing countries have these mobile networks, and so can content, and one of the things that I got pushback from in talking with people after the debate was, in developing countries, there's, content is delivered across these networks or through SMS, so that's the only way that they can get content. And I don't claim to be an expert in that at all about how that works, but is content, we want kids to be doing, we want students to be doing project-based learning, we want them to ask those higher than computational type questions. Can content be effectively delivered over networks like that? Is that possible? What does that look like? Are there examples of what type of content students are interacting with through a mobile device across a mobile network like that?
Yeah, I would just be careful about talking about content being delivered over the mobile network. If I'm looking at examples of that, you do get content going by text. There are some good examples. I think the Bangladesh work on learning English as a foreign language, where single words are sent out on a daily basis, building vocabulary over a period, and the texts are picked up and people learn from that kind of, can learn language in that way. But that's one way. That's very much kind of building on a system of learning which is rather similar to the way we work today. But if we're talking about working with mobiles in different circumstances, I mean, if you go to the UNESCO publications on mobile learning, types of things you'll find there are examples of mobiles being used to aid and support the assessment of fourth and fifth year medical students. This is at Leeds Medical School, because I think we had somebody from Yorkshire in this call somewhere. But in Leeds Medical School, where medical students were doing a clinical practice, spending 80% of their time in clinics, general practice surgeries and hospitals. Use of mobile phones was found to reduce the risk of infection, because it was paper and pencil previously were used to record things, but by recording things in mobile phones that improved. It enabled the trainee doctors to pull in the reflections and the comments of people who were also who were supervising them. So these might be experts in the medical care from general practice or wherever they were working, or they might be nursing staff. They were able to record their learning in a better way and build things up in that way, and so assess their work and their understanding in a better way. If we're talking about going into school, sorry, I know universities might be outside universities and medical school might be outside the experience of a lot of us. But on the other hand, the application of use of mobile learning in a vocational area follows a very similar path. When we talk, Mobile Oxford is something being used at Oxford University, but is applicable to schools, where students are being given access to information about the local area and being helped and supported as they become used to being in a different area and being in a different institution. And so just providing information which is kind of readily available. That's another way of doing things. And then there are all kinds of examples. If you there have been all kinds of projects. One that I recall from a long time ago was the Savannah project, which Future Lab did, it was about a simulation of a pride of lions, with the children taking the parts of lions and using mobile technology to communicate with each other, working in public places, but behaving, I'm sure not attacking antelope or anything, but behaving in a way that was hidden, but trying to actually understand the behavior of wild animals in particular circumstances through communicating in this different way. So there's all kinds of perhaps wild and interesting ways of working, which are not about delivery of content, much more about use of communication, much more about using the strength of the technologies that are available, rather than simply trying to have a computer in your hand.
Adrian, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think Gavin's absolutely right. Again, the functionality, which I'll come on to later, of some of the systems and services of the operators has value in the education process. And I think that alignment and understanding has to be made. I don't think we should be complacent and say we've got text-based knowledge transfer or learning, whatever you want to call it, and that's good enough. The mobile networks will churn quickly in these countries. And we have to be up to delivering mobile education experiences or knowledge in a just-in-time fashion or a strategic fashion as the demand grows. So existing, you've got, I think I mentioned Ineza from Kenya. Great example. It serves a purpose. It's extraordinarily focused on getting kids an opportunity to pass an exam to get into high school. They sign up for a set of exam questions that come over text. They answer them via text and get their results back, and they can continue to repeat these things again and again and again until they get better. And they value the service, therefore they pay for it, and it's sustainable in its own right. But it's very simplistic, but it's absolutely focused on a need, therefore it has some value. But as Gavin said, there are other parts of the system that are also valuable in the education process. In the Philippines, one of the operators has an IVR system for teaching English. And again, you can practice your English using voice. And this is targeted absolutely squarely at the demand for call center workers in the Philippines. So command of the English language is absolutely critical, and it gets people into jobs. Therefore, they will pay for the service. So I think there's a lot to be done. We can use the simple network approaches, which are valuable. However, let's not be complacent and realize that these networks will churn quickly. I think we already mentioned that there are more than 500 4G networks already in the world, and they're already talking about 5G. So encourage us not to be complacent.
Yeah, so I want to talk about networks here in just a second, but I want to remind everybody to make sure you post your thoughts into the chat. We really want to hear your ideas and what you're thinking. We also want to hear what questions you have, so be sure to submit those. And then also you're able to respond on Twitter as well, so we encourage you to tweet using the hashtag EFF11, or you can send those tweets to @EFFdebate. Again, this is all about, we want to hear not only from our esteemed guests, but we want to hear your thoughts as well. So talking about networks, it seems to me, and just from where I sit, that the rate of mobile adoption is much further ahead in many parts of the world than it is here in the U.S. And so I'm wondering why that is. And for me, you know, there's a lot of some people, and I asked this question on Twitter during the debate, and some people cited that it's the only way that they can. It's a much quicker means of communication. It's much easier to build a cell phone tower than it is to lay fiber optics for high-speed internet. But I'm sure there are many reasons. But why is it that rate of adoption seems higher in other parts of the world than it does, or is moving faster than it does here in the U.S.? Adrian, can you talk to that?
I had meant to do a little bit of research on this. I'm wondering whether the rate of adoption is actually lower. It may just appear like that, to be honest. I would be completely surprised. The systems and services are absolutely there in the US, as you said. From connectivity onwards, we've had a phenomenal discussion recently with Verizon, who offers end-to-end services over both mobile and fixed line networks for every aspect of school, from the administration right through the teaching and learning process. So I'm afraid I'm not going to be particularly knowledgeable on this one, but I would be very surprised if there wasn't a great adoption. But what I suspect is that the mobile devices are being used to supplement learning automatically, because people are very au fait with finding knowledge and comparing knowledge and being social outside of the classroom, and there's less need for that as a tool and a technique for teachers to use in the formal education setting.
There's a large push right now to have President Obama has a big push right now to connect 100% of classrooms to high-speed internet, whether that's wireless or wired technologies. And so that it's just intriguing to me to hear about these networks. 90% of countries, or all these students who are having access to these mobile technologies, but it just seems that the rate of adoption is slower here in the U.S. Gavin, what do you think?
No, I'd be careful with that figure of 90%, because that was just a broad sweep of where the level of adoption of mobile technology overall. It's not about actually what's happening in schools. But if you think about what's happening in schools, the degree to which anything is adopted is not to do with the thing that's adopted so often as to do with the degree of freedom that is allowed within to try new things, and the notion or the adoption of innovation in the way that things go on. So I think it's not, technology is more available in the United States, I would say, than the mobile technology is more available than in many other countries. I think it's traveling more quickly in developing countries, so in Africa, and I think I'm right in saying Nigeria has one of the most rapid growths of the use of mobile technology at the moment. But those figures are all for outside school. So when it comes to technology's use in school, I think we could go to the United States, I think we could go to many countries around the world, and we could find wonderful examples of where schools are really doing great things. And so maybe we should be looking at it from the other direction. Maybe we should look at it as what is it that has enabled those schools, or what is it that has helped those schools really to start moving with these technologies. And I'd say it's an easy one there to begin to point to leadership of a particular kind. It's an easy one there to people who have, whether very deliberately or very almost accidentally, changed the balance of control between controlling what pupils are doing, whereas allowing greater freedom is often the way that you can see a greater innovation happening. And when we're using mobile phones for learning, how much do we need to take a child through step by step what it is they need to do to use a mobile phone, and how much do we say, work it out with your peers, and then tell us what the answer is. So working with those kinds of different approaches, and it's coming back around to the pedagogical approach, I think, and also the sense of responsibility that you give to each of the parties who are involved in teaching and learning. That's how you get to the bottom of all of this. And I'd also be careful. I was just having a look through, in preparation for this call, the new OECD publication, Measuring Innovation in Education, A New Perspective. And that suggests that compared to other sectors, knowledge and method innovation is above average in education, product and service innovation is below average, and technology innovation is at the average sectoral level. So maybe we perhaps should just, in the way of golf swing, you do better when you just relax into a bit. Stop beating ourselves up about it, but start thinking just more clearly about how we work together with our students to actually achieve the learning we're hoping to achieve and get technology support for it.
Could I just offer a couple of data points from Ambient Insight who we use?
Yeah.
So it is obviously a mature market for mobile learning, North America generally, and we group Canada in that area as well. The revenue for mobile learning products reached $1.4 billion in 2012, but with a compound annual growth rate of 7.6%. So revenues are predicted to grow to $2.1 billion by 2017. But there's a really interesting note that says that the revenues for packaged mobile learning content are heavily concentrated on the consumer and healthcare segments in both countries. So they're not actually targeting schools and formal education systems.
Interesting. Go ahead.
So I was going to throw in one other point in there, just another source of information on this, which I was reflecting on, but the Horizon Europe 2014 Schools Education Edition, which came out just a few weeks ago, identifies rethinking the role of teachers as one of the fast trends, so that that suggests that there's a lot of work going on across Europe, certainly, in rethinking just what teachers might be doing and how they might be behaving, which is interesting in the context of this discussion. It also identifies students as co-designers as one of the wicked challenges, so that it's one of the things that is harder to achieve, but people are seeking to apply themselves to it. And also it also identifies as another significant challenge integrating of technology into teacher education. So there's a series of things there which kind of come out of that report, which point towards, if you like, some of the challenges we perhaps should be facing more in terms of actually getting mobile technology used well in education and used more widely in education.
So we're having lots of great, really great discussion, and we want to make sure that everybody's voice is heard. So if you have questions, be sure to drop those in. I'm going to be getting to some of those here in just a few minutes. One of the things that I want to shift gears slightly, and one of my areas of passion that I have, and a lot of area that I do a lot of work in, is with development of school leaders, so principals, curriculum leaders, technology leaders, headmasters, things like that. But we didn't really talk a lot about those, or they weren't really mentioned a lot in ESF 11. So I'm just curious to know, what is the role of the school leader or school administrator in the use of mobile technology, or the mobile learning environments that we're creating in schools? What part do they play in that process? Gavin, we can start with you.
I think, when we talk about leadership, I always think my thoughts immediately go, are we talking traditional leadership? Are we talking good to great leadership? Are we talking about emerging leadership? So there are different aspects of it, and it all depends how, I suppose, the nature and the traditions of the organization that you're working in and how you can make things happen. My belief is that it's like all kinds of policy in the world, that you can sit in a darkened room and make up policy of different kinds, and it's great fun, I'm sure, but actually the chances of it being implemented are very little because of the darkened room start, or just people kind of dropping that in from above. So if you're going to deal with leadership properly, it's about engaging the community, which includes the teachers of the school, the parents, the wider community, the students, everybody. And one of my favorite tools for helping some of that process when it comes to technology is what was called the self-review framework, and was developed initially in England but has been adopted by other countries. This was a series of questions that was initially developed to help the adoption of technology generally in schools, and had a series of questions which related to major areas like leadership, like assessment, like use at home of technologies. But the really power of the way in which this tool was used was to consider these questions as a community, as a whole community with the school. So the discussions would be held with teachers, with pupils, with the leadership of the school, with the wider community, with parents and local employers, about reflecting on where the school was with particular use of technology, where the school should have ambition to get to, and ultimately, by going through the series of questions in different areas, it allowed you to, helped you to prioritize the actions you should take in order to move forward. But in going through that with your community, you engage the whole community in the discussion. You engage people in such a way that there's joint ownership of of moving forward with whatever comes out of that process. And I think that's the kind of leadership that I would like to see, engaging in that wider discussion with the whole community of the school, and people who will share stuff, but not just hold that leadership to themselves, but bring everybody else into it. And so I think get commitment from the whole school when trying to move forward.
Adrian, what are your thoughts?
We recently published a learning policy handbook, really to show at the highest level the complexity and the diversity of subjects that should be looked at when considering introducing mobile learning into a formal education environment. And if you look at the breadth of what people have to look at, it's hardly surprising that administrators and school leaders find this complex and quite daunting. They have to set the stage, they have to define learning for themselves in their own context, provide a clear rationale, and like Gavin says, try and bring everybody along at the design but also the change management of the whole process. They have to develop a roadmap, they have to find funding, they have to establish some quite strategic partnerships with people they may not have partnered with before. So that's just really in setting the stage. When they also, from a policy perspective, had to provide an enabling environment. So they have to consider, the quality of their network, safety, security, and privacy of all the stakeholders, but mostly the children. They have to establish device policies, which are highly technical in many cases. And they also have to look at professional development for themselves, for teachers and administrators. Implementing itself is also complex. It involves looking at innovative pedagogy, increasing access to learning opportunities broadly, and supplementing formal learning opportunities, I guess. We've brushed on learning resources and materials, which includes content, curriculum. Assessment we've skipped over, but again, another huge consideration. Are we really going to show some improvements by having a mobile learning strategy? We have to ensure there's basics like adequate technical support. Technology, as we all know in classrooms, is fantastic while it works. So if it doesn't, we have enormous problems. There's the administration side as well as the teaching and learning side. There's the use of learning for emergency situations. So there's an awful lot to consider, and it is a complex thing. So the role broadly will be to understand the value. Why do we start up on this road in the first place? And then to invest strategically, not just in devices as we see in so many cases.
I think what you just said there is huge, is asking the question, what is it that we want to do with this initiative? And I think a lot of times that question is answered later on rather than at the beginning. And because it is very daunting, for all the reasons that you mentioned, it is very daunting as a school leader to not only just have to think about how devices are going to impact learning, but how they're going to impact school culture and how those policies need to be handled, and just like you said, funding, all of those things. It's a very, very daunting. So so in the short time that we have left, there's one more thing that I want to make sure that we don't leave out. Is there's another piece of this of a mobile learning puzzle that I think is something that we should be talking about, and that's vendors. So what is the role that vendors play? So the manufacturers of mobile technologies, and what is their role in all of this movement towards mobile learning? Adrian?
For me, it's very simple. I think initially vendors and mobile operators specifically really have to understand what they can uniquely add to the learning experience. And if they do that, they'll make that experience valued and therefore make it profitable, and they'll be able to sustain. They need to build ecosystems that they've never built before, and that's a very strategic piece of work and not to be underestimated. They have to be prepared to measure results, not just price of product, and they must continue to innovate. These are great companies with enormous amounts of innovation, used to rolling out business models at scale, very successfully over the last 15, 20 years, and I think they must continue to innovate.
Gavin?
I put a shout out for where we've got to already. You know, it's easy to be talking here about where to go next. Isn't it extraordinary that actually we've got almost as many mobile phone contracts in the world today as we have people? That's an extraordinary position to have got to. So clearly what Adrian's saying about being able to do these things at scale and rolling them out is absolutely true. And what's wonderful about it, I think also, is that it goes beyond the traditional boundaries of who has things and who has not, because clearly as we look across the world, countries which in the past have had difficulties getting technology are beginning to motor ahead with the use of mobile. So I think that's brilliant. So other things that need to happen, I think, already the handset costs are coming down. I think the other big challenge is the connectivity and supporting learning through that connectivity, and really the point you were making earlier, Steve, about what would help where we are trying to use deliver content or share content in different ways. So I think there is, in this extraordinary system that we have, spare capacity in different places. So maybe there's an issue about are there situations where some of that can be made more available. So that capacity and that connectivity, that connectivity and the handsets part, I think we're close to being able to move forward in those. What we need now is to build the collaborations between those who are working in the development of learning, teaching, who are working on the innovative side. And I think I'd love to see more collaborations between people in order to build, to accelerate that. I think one other part in it is actually not put to the mobile companies, but more in the hands of teachers. How do we engage more of the creativity, the innovation, the capacity of young people to use these technologies and to use them well? When you were talking about the policies earlier, I was thinking about there's a school which is listed in the UNESCO publications in the southwest of England, where the teacher in charge of geography has done great things with mobile technology, but one of the big things that he did was to work with the children in the school to build and to police the mobile policy, so that it was their policy, it wasn't one that was done to them, if you see what I mean. So I think a lot of that flatter world approach, I think, is something that can make a big difference to all of this.
Collaboration, I think, is definitely the piece that's needed. A lot of is needed. I think a lot of times what I faced in buying technology is I was buying technology that was created for the consumer world and trying to fit it into an education space. And sometimes it works, and sometimes it's a headache, and we have to adapt. And I definitely think more collaboration into looking at ways to create technologies that can serve in both worlds is what's needed. But I want to move into, in just a few moments that we have left, there were a couple of questions that have come in from those who are listening in today. One, we didn't catch who it came from, but one person has asked, can mobile learning drive student ownership of collaborative learning and be a catalyst for the changing role of the teacher?
Yes. Next question.
That's why I didn't send it to anybody. Did anybody want to expand on those thoughts?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the critical things that is happening anyway is that with the access to information that there is, or the access to collaboration that there is already, there is also already all kinds. There are fantastic examples of collaborative learning going on in an informal way already, and that if we don't change our education systems to be sympathetic to that and be supportive of it, I worry about the future of education systems as they currently stand. Now, that's a bit of a grand statement. I'm not kind of predicting collapse or things like that, but I think the reduction of relevance comes to mind if we don't respond in a sensible way.
Adrian, did you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, the kids, our children today are clearly digital natives, and the social world is online is fully integrated with their real world. And if that's ownership, then great. But I think we must also reflect on the fact that teachers are changing. You can see a lot more use of broad use of any tool to get the key thing done, which is the collaboration and the social aspect of the learning. If you remember, it wasn't that long ago where we used to force kids to use proprietary tools when they were in school on the devices they were given, if they had devices. And universities were classic at that. And there's every learning now is that what the important thing is that they do collaborate, not how they collaborate. So absolutely, I think the students will take ownership and will drive a change in the teachers. And let's not underestimate the innovation of good teachers.
So as Jim is monitoring the chat, one of the things that he just said is that there's been some discussion today around access for all, including those with students with disabilities. So what do you think are the ways that mobile learning impacts students with disabilities?
For me, I mean, of course there are multiple disabilities and multiple levels of these things, but I've seen some wonderful examples of children engaging in lessons when they have a period where they have to stay at home or in hospital, indeed, for reasons of health. So the distance between the school and home and the distance between school and the hospital is reduced absolutely by the access to technology, which allows them to continue to take part, to continue to be in touch with their peers, and to continue to collaborate in a variety of ways. So that's one thing. But I think there are whole other sets where technology has a really terrific part to play. I think just the caution, I suppose, about mobile technology is the degree to which that is designed to help people with particular challenges. And I think there's much more work to be done in that area and much more that the technology can do, as a lot of people would show you if you just have a look at their smartphones.
Adrian, your thoughts?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. We access is clearly critical in this equation and the support for learning disabilities or other disabilities. Quality, though, has a potential of really going up as well. We particularly in the continuity of support that can be offered to a learner with a disability, so it's no longer waiting for one teacher in one room to give you an hour of their time to talk through maths problems. It's potentially joining in a social world of learning where you are working with fellow individuals who may be struggling with a similar disability as well as the similar maths problem. But there's also that opportunity for reform. And I'm very mindful of, if anyone has seen the Mind Institute's work around music and math, I mean, you're really completely rethinking the way people might learn with certain disabilities. And in that context, the mobile device may just be a convenient access portal, which is great. But yeah, there's certainly an awful lot of opportunity in that space.
So we've got about 5 minutes left, and I wanted to be able to open it up, as I said in the beginning, to anybody who wanted to ask a question. You've got in your participant window, you've got the ability to raise your hand. And so if you want to ask a question and you've got the ability to speak through the mic or through your phone, go ahead and raise your hand, and then our folks on the technical side on the back end will unmute you, and you'll be able to ask that question. Let's see if we have anyone.
There is a Nikogiri Goswami with their hand raised, but I can't see, Stephen, that they have a phone. So maybe that person can send me a chat, because I can't see that they're connected to the audio system.
Oh, while we're waiting, there was one more question that came through from participants. Was, what advice do you have for schools and classrooms that are a long way from having these mobile technologies available to them? What advice do you have for them to continue to try to move forward?
My advice would be along the lines of that self-review framework, which would be to reflect on where you are, where your ambition is, and then plot a path to how you make the way forward. There's lots of stuff that you can do with different technologies, of course, but if you're trying to move forward, having a way which engages everybody in that discussion about how to build from where you are, I think is great. And then if you get their buy-in to that whole process and their backing for it, including obviously leadership of the school or leadership within the school, then I think that's a great way to begin to see how to move. And that person, I'd be very happy if they were to contact me through Education Fast Forward, and I shall point you towards the self-review framework to see if that is any help to you, if you wish. So somebody just wrote in a question: is the future a merged tablet and smartphone? So they're asking about specific technologies. So we've seen this movement to, especially with Apple and Samsung, a lot of these devices are going into the phablet phase where it's phone and tablet. Is that future a bigger phone and a smaller tablet? Does anybody dare predict what future technologies are going to look like? I'd be a rich man if I could.
I think we all would, right?
Yeah.
It's definitely interesting. It's an interesting question, and this was something that we faced the question of tablet versus mobile laptop, was which one was more effective, and our results were interesting, where younger students preferred tablets, older students preferred laptops.
I think that, one of the interesting thing in all of this, and this came up from work that I did with European SchoolNet on the iTech project there, I think one of the critical things in all of this, and one of the reasons that I really favour one-to-one where it is possible, is actually students' ownership of their own information and their own learning. It's not about the tablet, it's not about the mobile phone or whatever it is. It's their ability to organise themselves in today's world and organize their own learning and be part of the direction of that learning. And I think that's a fantastic advantage if we can build that kind of, I suppose, a sense of responsibility for what they're doing for themselves.
I completely agree.
So here's the challenge. So I'm going to give you 30 seconds. But before we do that, we're going to throw up the poll. So we asked the question in the beginning about the role that mobile learning has in the future of education, where 1 being not important or 5 being a cornerstone for an effective education. So we want to see how if your attitudes have changed or not. So you can go ahead. We'll leave that poll question up. So I'm going to leave this to both of you. We're going to start. We're going to start with Adrian. I'm going to give you 25, 30 seconds, no more than a minute. What do you think? Where do we go from here? Where does the conversation, or what are the actions that we need to go from here?
I think there's a couple of things we absolutely need to do. Policymakers at the highest level have to realize that this is a potential opportunity, and then to put it into their own context. We've already mentioned it's complex. There has to be debate. There has to be talk around finances, about setting the scenes, having a level playing field. providing an enabling environment from a policy perspective, and then a serious look towards implementation across the board and every aspect of implementation, not just devices, not just content, not just teacher training, but everything together. I think that's critical. But what does seem to be necessary in the short term, because clearly that is quite a long-term play, is to get some working examples. And I think when the mobile operators do get some successes across the world, we should really have a look at them. See if they are as impactful as we think, see if they will scale, see if they'll be appropriate in other environments. But absolutely we need to keep pressing, get those real-world examples, find out where the innovation is, and see if we can scale it through the social aspect that mobile clearly offers.
Gavin, where do we go from here?
Right. Policy needs to be enabling, but action needs to happen in practice. So one of the things I'd suggest for all people is to look at what's going on already. The UNESCO publications and many others, GSMA's publications, are great in that respect. I would also I encourage this idea of a self-review exercise to look at how to take a school or college or class forward. I think not of simply reinforcing what exists already, but what can be done differently and better. I'd encourage development of students' ability to ask their own questions and support them in developing and working out the answers to those questions. And it just reminds me of one of my favorite questions in all of this was an exercise done by Larry Rosenstock at High Tech High, where he challenges Year 9 students to make a documentary film about a city that was a city in 1492 and is a city still today. Just reflect on that for a moment. It's impossible not to think about that, I think, and think of all kinds of things to do with geography, policy, all kinds of things which are interesting. So asking good questions is what it's all about, and mobile phones can help us with the answers.
So one thing is definitely clear that it's a very complex, but from as the results from our poll say anything, that it's something that is definitely an important part of students' education now and for the future. So I just want to thank both of you, Gavin and Adrian. Thank you so much for your insight today. I can tell you I was taking furious notes, and I've got lots of reflection for myself too. I've got lots of learning still left to do. This was great. Just briefly, we want to encourage you, if you have questions or you have something that you would like to investigate further or need more information about, especially when it comes to mobile learning, you've got the email address there to email your questions to, and we encourage you for anything that you want to be able to ask, go ahead and email those questions in. And then make sure to keep up to date with all the EFF news. There's a wonderful newsletter that EFF produces. You can sign up for that at www.efdebate.org. And don't forget to like EFF Debate on Facebook and Twitter. Gavin and Adrian, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it. Thank you to everybody out there from across the globe who joined us for this wonderful conversation, and we will see you next time. Thanks.
Pleasure, Stephen. Thank you.
Thank you.